Mr. Leo, please start your presentation.
Is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible. Make it full screen.
Okay. Okay. Good evening to everybody. I'm Leo Lewis here. As Ms. Neha introduced herself, that I'm working for UL India Private Limited. Here we are going to discuss today about applying risk management concepts to the medical device software. Okay. So first question what we should have in mind is, what is a medical device? A medical device is an instrument or an apparatus or an implement or a machine or a contrivance implement, implant, in vitro reagents and other similar related articles which is used in diagnosis of a disease or other condition or in the cure, mitigation, treatment or prevention of the disease, or intended to affect the structure of the body, and which does not achieve any of its primary intended purpose through chemical action within or the body of the body or by being metabolized. You can see the medical devices here. On the first right side you will find a glucose meter, which is an in vitro diagnostics, and the next one is ECG and an MRI. All of these actually fall under a medical device. So the next question comes here is medical device software. A medical device software is a software system that has been developed for the purpose of being incorporated into the medical device, being developed, or that is intended for use as a medical device in its own right. So some of the applications, some of the software which we write to a medical device for operating of the medical device is also called medical device software, as well as some of the applications, and nowadays we find a lot of applications in iPhones, Android, and many other applications which we develop also comes under a medical device software, if the previous definition holds good. Okay, that is for use in diagnosis of a disease or other condition, or in cure, mitigation, treatment, and prevention of the diseases. So when this situation comes into picture, a software becomes a medical device. A software system is an integrated collection of software items organized to accomplish a specific function or a set of functions. Okay, you can see here the BP meter or the glucose meter, which shows the glucose level of a person, for which you would have had the software items which you have programmed and developed such that the display is visible and accurate enough. So the software behind this particular medical device becomes a medical device software. As we go further, we can see a medical software can be a component or a part of the medical device itself, be an accessory to the medical device. That is, in certain cases you will find the software application which is outside the part of the medical device for development or for therapeutic or for diagnosis, which you use. Okay, and medical device can be, software can be a medical device by itself and can be run on non-medical computers and still perform a medical function and be a medical device. For example, if you look at a workstation and an X-ray machine or a console or an MRI machine, where the workstation employs certain softwares where the diagnosis happens and control happens, for the medical device, that is MRI, becomes a software. It can also be embedded or a standalone information systems, and it will also include firmware. There is a misconception in the medical device industry manufacturers basically whether a firmware or an embedded system become a part of the medical device software, and should we apply all the relevant regulations, requirements of IEC and ISO standards applicable for a software. For that, the answer is yes, a firmware also. We will discuss further during the course of this webinar. The other concept which I would like to bring in is the PEMS, which is defined as Programmable Electrical Medical Subsystems. Programmable electrical subsystems is formed by integrating of programmable electronic subsystems. And programmable electronic subsystem is a system based on one or more central processing units, including their software and interfaces. So what is this? A microcontroller hardware device like microcontroller, ASIC, DSP chips, FPGA or CPLDs, okay, and a software image which defines its functionality. This becomes a PEMS. Okay, here we can see the hardware, microcontroller, ASIC, DSP, and FPGA or CPLD works only when a software image is loaded onto these, and when it's loaded, the unit becomes togetherly a PEMS. Okay. Let's go ahead and see how a medical device helps in safety and risk. What is safety? We all know safety is freedom from unacceptable risk. So what is unacceptable risk? The unacceptable risk depends upon the manufacturer, depends upon the user, kind of user, and the location, environment. So many parameters come into deciding whether the risk is acceptable or unacceptable. For example, you can see here, shark is very close to the human body, human scuba diver or a diver, and he is taking photograph of it. Okay, but he is sufficiently protected from being attacked. But here, the person inside the cage is a professional guy. He knows how to come out of a hazardous situation. So for him, this risk is something could be an acceptable one which he can take. But for us a layman, if you and I would want to do this exercise, we would consider it as an unacceptable risk. So it is very, very important to decide whether a risk is acceptable or unacceptable, and then we should implement the necessary mitigation. Here is an example, another example, where a Santa Claus is trying to climb or jump over to the balcony of this building. He has climbed to this, he has come to this height through holding the pipe, water pipe or something like that. Okay. If you look at closely, his leg is almost reached there, but it is not reached completely. So here, risk is a combination of a probability of occurrence of harm and the severity of that harm. Probability of occurrence is how frequent, how probable is that person going to fall. So that's the probability. Severity comes in picture when whether the person has reached the first floor or is on the 27th floor. If the person is on the first floor, maybe the severity couldn't be that high. He may break his leg or hand. But whereas if he has reached to the top of the building, that is on the 27th floor, and now he is trying to jump onto the balcony there, then the severity is huge. He cannot survive at any cost. So when we are assessing a risk, it's a combination of probability of occurrence and the severity of that harm. Okay? What is hazard? It is a potential source of harm. For example, a matchstick. We all use matchstick at home, and we all have a hazard in our hand. But when we are using it in a controlled manner, the potential source of harm is less. Now, I use this matchstick and I end up into a fire like this. Then this becomes a hazardous situation and a harm. Physical injury or damage to the health of the people and damage to the property of the environment is an harm. So in a medical device industry, if you're looking at a software, the clinical safety is very important, and clinical harm is what we need to arrest. You cannot have a clinical hazard, a hazardous situation, and a harm happen to the user. If there is a hazard or a hazardous situation, we will have to go back and see what is the risk risk is a combination of probability of occurrence and the severity of that harm. Now, clinical harms, for example, tissue damage. What is the tissue damage? Dead cells, damage to the skin, stroke, hemolysis, visual impairment, toxemia, anemia, hypertension. All of these are clinical harms. Even a breach of privacy becomes a clinical harm because the patient data is leaked out or attacked by some network, and the privacy of the patient is lost. So that could also result in a clinical harm. Okay. Dysosmia is a loss of smell, and burns are something which is very common. But these clinical harms we will have to consider during a risk management process. So risk management process in a medical device, we will have to comply to ISO 14971. The ISO 14971 is an internationally accepted standard, and it is necessary as a part of the process and as a part of the program product development, whether it is a hardware or a software. A risk management process needs to be available. So risk management process has got risk analysis, for which the basic criteria is intended use of the product, intended identification of the characteristics of the product, and identifying the normal use and a foreseeable misuse of the product. The foreseeable misuse here is very, very important, which most of us forget to put a list down. What is foreseeable? Situations. So when we have these intended use, identified characteristics, normal use conditions, and the foreseeable misuse conditions, we will be able to draw the list of hazards and hazardous situations. So with this, the risk analysis begins. During the risk analysis, the manufacturer will list down the severity and the probability of a hazard and hazardous situation. For example, as I showed you in the Santa Claus picture, where the person is holding a pie and trying to jump onto the balcony, we are going to assess what is the severity of the person falling from that position and what is the probability of him falling. So, as we discussed, if we consider that the person is falling from the 27th floor, then the severity is going to be high, and probabilities we will have to determine. So based on this, we will do a risk evaluation. And risk evaluation, we will segregate the unacceptable risk and an acceptable risk. For an acceptable risk, you need not have to do any more further assessment, because you know that the risk is acceptable. But whereas for an unacceptable risk, a risk control needs to be implemented. A risk control is necessary to bring down the probability level or a severity level to an acceptable limit, or the risk to be an acceptable limit, such that the product which we sell is going to be safe. Here we are not going to introduce you to implementation and effectiveness and an overall evaluation and risk evaluation report, post-production information, because this risk management process is a dynamic process. It doesn't end with a risk control implementation. We will have to also verify the effectiveness of this particular implementation, and followed by which we also need to see if overall all the risks have been evaluated and all the risks are acceptable, and we need to document them into a risk management report. And post-production and during production and post-production, that is, once the product is placed into the market, we will have to continuously monitor if there are new hazards which we have not considered previously hazardized, or the hazards which we have considered for the risk control which we have implemented, whether the effectiveness is not sufficient. There are probabilities when we are making the design initially, we assume the implementation, whatever we have done, is sufficient based on certain parameters. But when we get onto the field, we learn that the implementation is of no use or very less effective, resulting in an unacceptable risk. So in such a situation, we may need to drive back to the risk analysis and do an evaluation again and implement an additional or a replacement of the control and control. This is very, very important, and risk management process is dynamic in nature. Evaluation of risk, if you would like to see, for example, the first module, it says it's a very simple switch circuit where an AC signal is loaded onto the one side, connected onto the one side, and a load, for example, a lamp, is on the other side. Here the failure modes are very less. What could be the failure for a switch? It could be a mechanical failure, and each time you switch on and switch off, there's an arcing which happens. You would have also observed at home the switches are getting overheated. Sometimes the switches may get short-circuited as well. So, in order to mitigate a risk, or as the technology advances through the evolution, we find industrial control relay which is coming in. The controller is having a switch magnetically activated, and the switch gets activated to a controller which is outside of this particular block diagram. So as the technology gets complex, we are having another failure mode which is called unintended operation, because the controller may give a false trigger and activating the load, which is a lamp or a motor. As we go further, and where the technology, the ICs and also things started coming in, we have used the controller like track here to control the load. The same load, same AC, but the control is through a track, by which we have increased the complexity, but we have kept the patient place and the user very safe from electric shock. At this moment, we can see that there could be a mechanical failure, there could be an arcing, overheating, short circuit, and unintended operation as the previous one. And in addition, we could also see a signal noise, which could trigger the track, voltage irregularities, EMI, and incorrect logic. So we can see clearly that as the product develops through the development and technology, we also see that there are more and more failure modes. Finally, we come to a controller where the person is not physically available and he is using internet to connect the load. So here we can see, in addition to the previous ones, we can also come across network errors, virus attacks, and also things. So here, this is a very significant flowchart. If I would like to see, as the technology goes forward, we will have more and more failure modes, and we have more and more risk coming into picture, which we need to address during our development process. This is continuation with the previous one. The frequencies are going high, the rise and fall times are coming down in the clock. We can see that very clearly when the processors were as good as 386 and 486, and today we have i5s and i7s, but the frequencies and the rise times and fall times have gone high. The supply voltage variations have gone high, noise margins have come, supply voltages have gone high, and the noise margins have come down. Functional capabilities have increased, whereas tolerance to fault is reduced, and hence we have a functional error by increasing. Here I am trying to demonstrate a risk relationship. A sequence of events are fed into the flowchart here, which I will describe in later, and a hazard is there. A hazard with the sequence of events results in an hazardous situation, and once the hazardous situation is there, there could be a harm to the patient or the user, and the harm could be severity of the harm. could be as simple as a small burn, injury, or death. At the same time, the hazard and the sequence of events and the hazard situation has got a probability factor. What factor does the operator or the user come in contact with the harm or the hazard? So, based on the probability of occurrence harm and severity of the harm, we determine risk. So, sequence of events are like is an example. I have given an example here. This is an IVD medical device. IVD is a very simple glucose meter or a blood check meter which we have at home. And process failure, due to some process failure, IVD device malfunctions. So this results in a IVD examination failure. An incorrect or a delay examination results. As a result, a medical physician will do a diagnosis and the diagnosis is a wrong diagnosis. An incorrect or a delayed medical treatment can happen. If for example, if the blood glucose which is measured is within the acceptable range, then there could be a delay in the treatment, or if the glucose meter shows a high reading, then that could be an incorrect or a delayed medical treatment, and which is resulting in another situation. Patient is an injury or a death. It depends upon the severity of the hazard. You can see nowadays the glucose meters which has started coming in home, which actually does not have any buttons on it. You just need to put this stress strip in an intended way, and the test it starts showing the reading. What is the significance of this? The significance here is the user interface is reduced to a minimum, and by which we are actually attaining a less user error. At the same time, software malfunction is reduced. Further, if I am looking at what all sequence of events can happen, you can see here a register failure in a microcontroller can result in a variable incorrect, and which could result in an incorrect calculation and a wrong diagnosis. A register which doesn't function. Okay. A clock chip fails, where it results in a microprocessor stopping to work. And if I'm using this microprocessor to monitor the temperature monitor is no longer functional, and which results the temperature can overshoot and the patient or the user can experience burn. So another situation of a sequence of events, if you look at a low voltage source out of specification, results in a communication chips hanging. This is very common, which we have seen very frequently, and we also see in our mobile phones today. Okay. Similarly, when it happens on a medical device, the risk is higher. A system waits indefinitely for data which never arrives, and system cannot respond to other inputs. If an alarm if this microprocessor is used for an alarm condition is not processed, and user is not notified of an event which requires address by a patient or an user. Another example, if you would like to see, a software algorithm code is incorrectly done. Input sequence results in a wrong output response and resulting in a wrong therapy, and which results in a patient harm. So if I am putting the risk in the form of a table, you can see on the horizontal where I have described the severity as negligible, minor, and moderate, and major, and on the vertical you will find the incredible, improbable, remote, occasional, and probable, and frequent. We have two regions here, green and red, which says, based on the particular scenario, if the risk is probable and the severity is negligible, then we can consider that to be an acceptable risk. At the same time, if the probability is improbable, and even if the severity is major, since the probability is improbable, we will say it's an acceptable risk. And as we go on towards the end, for example, if you consider the probability is occasional and even if the severity is moderate, you can see that the risk is unacceptable, the red region is unacceptable, and where you will have to do a risk analysis, risk evaluation, and risk control to bring down to an acceptable level. So, in the risk management process, we have seen that the sequence of events, hazards and the hazardous situation are the inputs to the risk analysis, and the risk analysis further goes on to the risk evaluation and risk control. Some of the software risk management process, you can see software hazards like logic errors, coding errors, translation errors. So logic error is where we have put the coding very wrongly, or there is something wrong in the code itself. And translation of errors is where the user specification is translated into a program with the assumptions and errors and the misunderstanding of the user requirement. So these are the software hazards. In the microelectronic hardware hazards, as we discussed, stuck cut or a bridging can happen, and clocks or timings that can stop working, memory sectors can go back, addressings can be wrong, program counter may not work properly. So some of the things microcontroller hardware hazards could be at the manufacturing of the chip itself, that is a bridging or a stuck cut can happen during the dyeing and the molding process of the microprocessor, and sometimes during the EMI interference and the voltage variations, we could result the microelectronic devices can get damaged, and memory sectors we have seen that over a period of time the memory sectors can go bad. If I would like to go into the software risk management sequence of events, one hazard may result in more than one harm. For example, we can use questioning to determine the sequence of events, what happens then. For example, microprocessor register defect is stuck at fault. What happens then? This is very good questioning which you should continue till we get to the harm. So for example, what happens then? Variable for measured temperature may be corrected and saved to the register. So here I am using a microprocessor to measure the temperature for an intended function, maybe a thermometer. Okay, so now I am looking at what happens then. If the temperature is if the variable is corrupted and it is saved to the register, the temperature variable read from the register always below limit. It is another situation which I am trying to assume. Okay. Now, if the temperature is always read as below limit, what happens then? The logic test for temperature exceeding the limit always false. What happens then? Over temperature alarm does not initiate when actual patient temperature exceeds limits. This is an example which I would like to recall in specifically in India. Recently, we had a situation where an incubator caught fire. So we can take this example there. I mean, this is the example which I put is only illustrative, but you can take this example there. What could have gone wrong? The microprocessor register could have resulted, defect could have resulted in the temperature measurement, and the nurses or the users were not alerted because over temperature alarm does not initiate when actual patient temperature exceeds limits. If I continue with that, we arrive at a hazardous situation. Now the over temperature alarm does not initiate when a patient temperature exceeds. What happens then? The patient temperature monitoring becomes ineffective or defective. Correct? So this is an hazardous situation. So if we have an hazardous situation, then we are going towards the harm. The patient temperature monitoring becoming an ineffective, it could result in a hypothermia, burns, blisters, swelling, etc. Okay, so this is how a sequence of events which we have got should be gone through what happens then context, and we can come to a harm like this. With this harm, we will be able to determine whether the severity is acceptable. I mean, severity is incredible, improbable, remote, occasional, probable, and frequent is the probability, and negligible and minor and moderate major is the severity. Now, if you consider this as a minor, major, or major, that again depends upon the manufacturer or the designer. So, based on that, you would have to come down to acceptable level. Likelihood of PEMS failure. If I want to state some clauses from ISO 14971, discusses the probability of estimation for certain hazards. Some hazard occurs because of systematic rather than random failures. For example, hazards derived from a software failure are due to systematic failures. So you can see very clearly the microprocessor or register defect, and followed by we have a sequence of events which is systematic and not random, which is resulting in a failure. And you can also further see the risk estimation for a systematic fault should be based on the presumption that the systematic failure will occur and at an unacceptable rate. So in a software, we need to consider the risk estimation and the probability as very high. During the initial estimation, the risk. Even if you look at IEC 62304, which is a standard for software development and lifecycle process, the clause 4.3 states, if a hazard is due to a failure of a software system to behave as specified, the probability of such failure shall be assumed to be 100%. So, if you go back to the risk relationship here, the probability of occurrence of harm will always be 100%. During the initial risk evaluation, this is necessary because we know the system, the hazards are systematic in the software. Okay, software risk evaluation, severity of harm is based on the risk management. Severity of harm is determined based on the manufacturer's risk management process. So this is during the risk management process, the manufacturer will need to determine what is severity, whether it's a burn is severity, or death is severe, or burn, we will have to put it in a minor, major, and then we need to determine for each of the harm which we come across, whether which sector it falls under. But for probability, the software probability is going to be 100% or probable or frequent. Based on the risk matrix which the manufacturer designs, a risk evaluation is done and determine whether it falls under a green region or a red region. If it falls under a green region, then it is acceptable, and if it falls under a red region, it is unacceptable. So we will have to do an evaluation for software hazards and the microelectronic hardware hazards separately. There are certain standards like 61508, IEC 61508, which gives you a kind of list of hazards and mitigation designs which you can implement. And with respect to UL, you can also use UL 1998, and section 11.1 gives you software designs aspects, and appendix A gives you a hardware design. So this is what we do. Next, what about purchase software or software components? So every time we don't depend upon developing a software by ourselves, we sometimes buy. For example, a Windows operating system is a software which we buy, and we use that software as a platform. The libraries for coding, all of these are coming under commercially available software, which is called software soup, software of unknown provenance. Software items that is already developed and generally available, and that has not been developed for the purpose of being incorporated into the medical device. For example, nowadays we see embedded computers which has Windows C, Windows 7 or such thing, which is not intended for a medical device application. And these are all known as off-the-shelf software, or software previously developed for which adequate records of development process are not available. That is legacy products. For example, in medical device manufacturers like you, who has developed a software long ago where there was no process existing, and these kind of software will be considered as a legacy product, like off-the-shelf software not developed by the medical device, subsystems of not medical engine, and then the legacy devices come under a software of unknown provenance. In this case, the manufacturer should take a special account of the need for additional risk control measures. It is important because the product owner is the manufacturer and the software is not owned by the manufacturer, but at the same time, even the end product manufacturer will need to consider additional risk control while using such software of unknown provenance. So other terminologies which is used is off-the-shelf software, commercially off-the-shelf software, and these are generally available software components for which the medical device manufacturer cannot claim complete software lifecycle control. So if you look at IEC 62304, it provides some insights for dealing with the legacy or the SOUP or the ODS products. Identification and configuration of SOUP items is very necessary. Specifying the functional and performance requirements of SOUP items that are necessary for its intended use of the medical device. Hazard analysis of SOUP items, including hazards that could result from a failure on an unaccepted operation. So this doesn't limit yourself to using the software or the development of the software within the manufacturer premises, but the software which you have purchased for your use. Configuration of SOUP, how you configure them, how you use them, architectural elements required for the proper operation of SOUP items. You may also need to go and evaluate the SOUP anomalies list. Many of the times, the software manufacturer would also give you the list of anomalies which could be handy for your risk analysis and management of the software. Next, this is the last topic, which is software safety classification. Manufacturer shall assign to each of the software systems a safety class. So this is very important, and if you look at 62304, the requirements of documentation, requirements of the process depends upon the safety class. So for example, a class A could be a non-injury or a damage to health is possible. Class B, non-serious injury is possible. Class C, death or a serious injury is possible. Documentation is required depending on the class as we have discussed, and you can refer to Appendix A.2 for a summary of IEC 62304. Based on the inherent risk of the software, hazard could result from a failure of software to behave, and the probability of such failure shall be considered 100%. So this is the clause 4.3, which is discussed about 100% of probability. If the risk is to mitigate, is mitigated by a user's hardware control, and then the software classification may be downgraded. That is, for example, to initially start off with, all software must be considered as class C. And then, now if you are giving an additional hardware risk control measure, then the software with the class C can be brought down to class D, software system. So this enables us to determine the documentation requirements, and manufacturer may define the class of the software system and break system down into units and items, providing the rationale for classification if the downgrading is required. So here is an example for a software system or a software item which is class software item W is class B and software item Z is class C. So the effective software item Y is going to be class C, which is severe, and other software item which is X is only a class A with no risk, but since the software item is Y, section is Y, is a class C, the overall software system becomes a class C. With this, we come to a conclusion of the software risk management, and which is the key to success. Hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and thank you very much. I've used the following standards for your references. IEC 62304-2006 is a medical device software and software lifecycle process, which basically discusses on the process which you need to follow development of a software, specifically the medical device software. The AMI TIR 32 is a medical device software risk management. It gives you guidance on how to prepare a software risk management and what to consider. ISO 14971 is a guidance document and guidance standard which discusses on the risk management to medical devices. This is a general standard for all kinds of medical device, and it is necessary for any medical device manufacturer to use this particular standard. Finally, thank you very much for listening to me. Yeah. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you for the insightful presentation. Let's quickly take up the questions now. Please read out the questions and their answers so that all your users may listen to the commendable insights.
Okay, I've received a question from Digit Chidda. How can I reduce unwanted signals or noise from a received data? Okay, so for which you will have to use the digital filter circuits, and additionally you may also need to see how you can prevent the noise being fed into the unwanted signals through an EMI design compliance. In case of art, okay, this is a continuation question. So we will have to address the digital signal noise through EMI issues firstly, and you may need to additionally introduce filters if required. Okay, Komarne Madurai has asked a question. What is the first line of safety to the patient in a medical environment? If I understand your question, it is the first level of safety to the patient in a medical environment. That is going to be the user or the patient should be free from all unacceptable risks while using this particular medical device. And if there are any unacceptable risks resulting, either have to mitigate them through the risk management process which we have discussed, or you will have, there is a concept called if the risk is necessary for the treatment or an elevation of disease, then a risk-benefit analysis approach should be taken. Sorry. Next question is from Sapna. Can you please explain the difference between improbable and incredible? Okay, Sapna. This is only an example which I put in there. Improbable is something which is not possible, and incredible never happened, and it's a super design. So this is not something which is related to the risk management. Various manufacturers have different words and terminologies which they use to determine the probability of harm. So I used one randomly to keep you interesting. What is the frequency of risk analysis to be reviewed in a practice? Okay, Komarne has just asked this question. So this is a very, very good question. The risk analysis never stops. It's an ongoing activity. Okay. During the complete design cycle, you will have to, during the complete design cycle, you would have to review your hazards and hazardous situations and see if the risk analysis is necessary. It's an ongoing activity till the expected service life of the medical device is coming. Any standard practicing of an ISO auditing adopted to the medical system? Again from Komaran. ISO 14971 is the ISO which you will have to follow for a risk management, and for medical system you will have to comply to ISO 13485, which is a quality management system. This is very much similar to 9000, which most of you would have heard, but something additional with respect to the medical devices considering its severity and regulations. Piyush Agarwal has asked a question. Since now so many vendors are out there selling medical device, is there a certification which can be verified to get the device validated for better safety compared to other vendors? There are a lot of certification programs. For example, even UL has a UL certification mark which we issue out for the manufacturers, which edges out the other manufacturers from the certification. Other acceptable marks are CE marking, and for which the product needs to comply to IEC ISO standards, and this is done through testing, and we can help you with the certifications. Questions on sequence, Vinay Nair. Vinay Nair has asked a question on sequence of events during RM process. Up to what point should we go? This is exactly another important question. We will have to go to an instant where the probability of such an harm is going to be within the acceptable limits, because initially the probability is going to be 100%, and now you have a sequence of events where you will have to determine what kind of harm is going to happen and whether this harm results in a severity, what severity is this particular sequence of events resulting into. Arpita has asked a question: do you mean that any software only product needs to be Class C only? Does it not depend on the application? As you mentioned, adding hardware could reduce the safety, software safety. Okay. Initially, you should start off with the classification of Class C as per IEC 62304 4.3, and then you will have to see with the hardware whether it can come down to reduce the level of severity of the classification. If I would like to show the 62304, it says, for each software system, until a software safety class is assigned, Class C requirements apply. Okay. Any more questions?
So I don't think so there's any other questions from our audience. So let's wind up the session now.
Okay.
It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of the webinar will be available on techgig.com by tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you.